Everyone. My name's Julie Blomquist, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the St. Louis SQL Server and Business Intelligence User Group here in St. Louis. Today we're going to have assigning sprocs and assigning elevated permissions with Sharon Reid. Next. We're having a meeting next month. It's going to be an afternoon meeting here at Security as well, and Riley's going to be giving a talk on Power App. Next. We have the PASS 24 Data Community Summit is coming back. It's going to be starting on November 4th, and that again is in Seattle. And here are a listing of Data Saturdays and SQL Saturdays. And I also put in the St. Louis area, the DevOps conference in St. Charles is August 14th is when it starts. So Data Saturdays and SQL Saturdays are one-day mini conferences with lectures that you can go to, and they only cost usually involved is just for the luncheon. So it's a great way to get a one-day of education. Okay. And this is all about today's presentation. I did want to thank Doherty Business Solutions. Emily is downstairs escorting people up into this into the room, but maybe at the end she'll be able to give a little talk about, you know, they do consulting and they do project work, but we really appreciate them sponsoring the meeting. We get the meeting room and dinner or lunch, so they do a great job. But I'll let take it away. This is being recorded, and we will be posting it to the YouTube channel. So if you subscribe over to our group on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. And this is, oh, I don't know. Emily was going to turn the lights down so you could see better, but what she will when she comes in. I don't know how to do it. So I have in here my, thank you, my email, and the GitHub has all of the scripts available so that you can demo, do the demo yourself. If you want to email me or ask me for those links, that's great. That's good. And here I'm at the Grand Canyon. So every presentation I do, I always have travel pics. So there we go. About me. So I used to originally, I taught high school journalism and English, and then I taught English at the community college for a long time. I was adjunct, and after a nasty divorce, I needed a full-time position with benefits. So I went and I found LaunchCode. I took the SQL cohort, the very first one, and found it, was able to get a really good job out of it. And I wanted to come back and help other people have the same opportunities I did. So when Kathy asked me to be mentor for her when she was stepping down, it made me feel so honored, and there we go. One of my passions is database security, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Where the expectations for the presentation, I'm assuming that you are not right at the beginning. Sorry, I know some of you are. I'm also assuming that you are not an expert in database security, that you are somewhere in the middle like I am, and so that you could go on the journey with me. Feel free to ask all the questions that you want. We'll have time at the end, especially for questions. Also, a little bit about how permissions work. I'm not going into details tonight about that. I'm expecting you to have a minimum of understanding of that, but we can talk about that a little later if you have questions on that. Oh, and this one is from a trip to Zion, and this, I'm in my tent, and that's my view. So, principle of least privilege is a security principle that means that you give someone the ability or permissions, the access that they need when they need it, and only what they need. So not over permissioning. And this is a very big principle in database security and security in general. Let's see, securables. Securables are what we call objects in SQL Server. So your stored procedures, a table, a view, those are securables. And we can actually give permissions on just those objects. It does not have to be database wide. And so that's what that's about. Temporary. If somebody is a developer and they're troubleshooting an issue and they only need permissions for a day or even a couple hours, we should do that rather than just grant them the permissions and then they have access from then on. And then what we're talking about tonight is not giving permissions overly elevated permissions that they don't need and how we can do that. So it's a little bit fun. And this is my daughter, Allison, who normally comes. And she is on Angel's Landing, and I find that absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I did not do that portion of the hike with her. I did get up the mountain, but I did not do that section because I am not crazy. Okay. So with elevator permissions, we have 3 times 4 problems, things to get around. The first one is what have not possible to grant without high level permissions. You know, and there is no truncate table permission, unfortunately, and even in 2022, there still isn't. So I'm going to show you how to kind of get around that by signing this block. Another one is if the permissions are not granular enough. So, for example, 2022 finally gives people the ability to have permissions. I'm sorry, view audit logs, but I don't want to have someone always be able to view audit logs. So I want to narrow that down. So either the permission's not available or I need to narrow it down. The other 2 times that you can use, you have to figure out how to deal with the problems of elevated permissions are if you are doing cross database permissions. So if you are doing like a store procedure in one database that is pulling data from a different database. In that case, we have to do something to figure that out. The last one is dynamic SQL. And I know in my LaunchCode class, I tell students not to do this, but sometimes you have dynamic SQL and that will also break any kind of chaining. And so those are the times where you have to figure out, we have to solve a problem. Yes? No, I'm talking about on the same server, but a different database. So fully qualified. Yeah. Okay, and there are 3 ways that you can get around this problem. Like if you have a stored procedure and you want somebody to, and we'll demo in a little bit, and you want somebody to be able to run that stored procedure, but you know, you don't want to grant them those elevated permissions that they would need on the underlying objects. So 3 ways to fix it. The first way is ownership chaining or cross database ownership chaining. So ownership chaining is inside that one database. And it's on by default and you cannot turn it off. It's called ownership chaining. It's how SQL Server works. But there are limitations to it. So what ownership chaining is again, if I give you execute on the stored procedure and you need to have those some kind of a problem that we were talking about earlier. So I'm sorry, let me back up. If I give you execute on a stored procedure, and inside that stored procedure, it's pulling data from a specific table. You don't have to have permissions on that table because of ownership chaining. The stored procedure, it will do it for you. There are times when that ownership chaining breaks. And that's what we're talking about, how to fix it if the ownership chaining is broken because of dynamic SQL or blah, blah, blah. Cross database ownership chaining is the same, except you have to turn it on. So I said ownership chaining inside a database, that's just always on. Cross database ownership chaining, you have to have turned on. So your company may not have that on for it. It might not be an option for you. What breaks ownership chaining? The objects have to be owned by the same person, and that's usually the case depending on how you set up your server, your SQL server. But if they're not, then that'll break it. Ownership chaining only applies to select, insert, delete, and update. It does not apply to something like truncate table or alter table, something like that, which we'll demo in a little bit. Dynamic SQL is another time that'll break ownership chaining, whether it's ownership chaining or cross database ownership chaining. And so we will have another demo first. I'll show you how we fix that one. And in cross database ownership chaining, the user has to be in both databases. So even if they don't have to have permissions on a table, underlying object, they have to have access to that database. So that's another one. But we could get into cross database ownership chaining in more detail, but we're not going to tonight. It's like outside the scope of tonight. So ownership chaining is one way, or cross database ownership chaining, but things break it. Another way, and this is a favorite of people, not as secure, but they use impersonation. And the normal one is execute as owner. And I'm going to show you a demo why we don't want to do that. Execute as owner is often used in a stored procedure. And one of the reasons we don't like it is because the security context actually changes. You're executing it as something else, somebody else. So let's go to demo. Okay, so I have a sproc. A sproc is a stored procedure, and I'm going to, let's look at it. Okay, so my stored procedure here, all I'm going to do in that stored procedure, I'm trying to drag this so you can see. And I have in the comment block, I have a link to where I got the idea for using this stored procedure. And all it's doing is pulling out the context of who's doing this, running this stored procedure. So it's going to pull that information back. That's it. Okay. So if I run it as, wrong one. If I run it as me, I'm going to execute my stored procedure. And you can look down here and see, yes, that's Sharon. I ran it. I own this database. I own everything in there. So it ran as me. But I have sysadmin. And I can assure you that, I can't assure you of that. Hopefully, at any company, they are not giving you sysadmin on a production database or a server, SQL server. So I am going to run this as Pam from the office. So you can see I am executing, I'm impersonating, execute as user, Pam from the office. I'm going to execute as Pam from the office. My boss's name is Pam, so I call her Pam from the office. Anyway, execute that. And she is, running as Pam from the office. She executed it as herself. Now I'm going to go back to that store procedure and I'm going to change it. And I'm going to use, let's say, for example, in here, we were doing something that's beyond execute and one of those like truncate table or dynamic SQL or something that we're going to talk about later. And so what people like to do is they will put in their store procedure, execute as owner. What that means is that it will execute under a different context. So let's show how this works. And now I'm still executing this as Pam from the office, but you can see it's really executing under my context. So if you have auditing or anything like that, it's not going to show you who really executed that store procedure. So there you go. You can also, you don't have to do just as owner. You can also change a store procedure to run as a user. This time I'm going to do execute as Katie Archives in Medieval History. One of my coworkers has a PhD in medieval history, which I think is really cool. Now I'm going to run this again. I'm running it as Pam from the office. If Pam from the office was going to run this store procedure, but it's really somebody else. And we don't really want that. We want our auditing to be accurate. So that's impersonation. So one way people like to get around the elevated permissions issues is the first one, the ownership chaining or cross database ownership chaining. The second way people like to do it is impersonation. But both of those have security flaws. If I put in execute as owner, I could put all kinds of things in that struct. Somebody could go and change that store procedure. I won't know it, or I might not. And they can grant themselves permissions. They can do all kinds of things. We don't want that. So the third way that you can get around that elevated permissions problem is by module signing. Sign those sprocs. Module signing is a little bit more work. And I am all about making sure that people can do their jobs, but in a safe way. So if sometimes database security experts will want, and not sometimes they just do, they want us to sign all of our stored procedures. And I am not there by any means. So I am starting with the ones that are the most problematic instead of signing all of them. But I'm going to show you, it's a little bit of more work, but it's not substantial. Okay, so we're going to show you how it works. Ensures authenticity. And we know, remember I said how the person who was executing the sproc, but it wasn't coming back as them. This way it will come back as them. Okay, so it's not changing the security context. The other positive of this is if somebody goes and makes a change to my store procedure, that is no longer a signed store procedure and that those permissions go away. So they can't run it. So they can't just randomly, somebody can't just change it without having the security, the password, etc. First to sign that. You can use multiple signatures in combination if you want to, and let's go to the demo. And again, my daughter is crazy. Just saying. Okay. The first demo that I want to go over, I don't want that, is if we have dynamic SQL. So let's pull up our store procedure for dynamic SQL. And you can see in here, all I'm doing, this is dynamic SQL. We know it because it's in red. And all I'm doing is pulling back from a table. And then I have a string, so a parameter to search for a food in that table. Okay. So that's all I'm doing. It's a very simple dynamic SQL example, but it works for our demo. So that's what the stored procedure looks like. And okay. So when I run it as myself, remember I'm sysadmin, so am I going to have any problems running this sproc? No, not at all. And you can see in here that I'm using the parameter donut because I like donuts. And it pulled back the row in my table that has donut. So I searched on the word donut. Works great. I'm sysadmin. Okay, so I have a user called Allison Swims with Gators. That's from our trip to the Everglades. And I'm going to grant her execute on that store procedure. I'm going to run it this same store procedure with the donut as my parameter. And I'm running it under the context of Allison Swims with Gators. What's going to happen? Is it going to work? No, it's not going to work. And I know this because Sharon, you would not be doing the demo if it would work. So here we go. Yes? No, I just gave it to her right here. She has execute. Okay, so I'm going to run it. She has execute on it, but it did not run. The select permission was denied on the object fever foods database, blah, blah, blah. Because remember I said what breaks that ownership chaining or the chaining is the dynamic SQL is one of those. So anytime that you have dynamic SQL in your stored procedure, you're going to have to do something. Everybody's default is to do execute as owner, but we don't want to do that because it's not secure. So we are going to sign this sproc. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. First thing we're doing is we're creating our our cert. So here we're going to create our cert, just creating the cert, dynamic select cert, encryption by password. Obviously I used a fake password. Whatever password you use, I highly recommend putting it into a password manager because you're going to need to remember it and hopefully it's not easy to remember. Okay, so use a password management and then with subject, you have to have something in there, but nobody ever looks at the subject, so it doesn't matter what you put in there. Okay, but I like to pretend like it's useful, so I put in something useful. So let's create that cert. And now if I bring back my certs in this database, it's right there. Goes up, the name, the encrypted by password, etc. So now I've signed my cert. And I only have to do this the first time that I use this stored procedure and I first set it up. So it's going to have several steps, but you only have to do that once. Okay. So now I've created the cert. Now I'm going to sign my stored procedure with that cert. So here we go. Add signature. to that cert. That's the name of the stored procedure, the dynamic food search one. And with cert, dynamic select cert. And I called it dynamic select because I'm going to give it select. Just trying to make it easy. You can use certs for multiple store procedures. You can have multiple store procedures signed with one cert if you've given that cert the certain specific permissions. Okay, so now we're going to sign our sproc, and we have 2 more steps. The next step we're going to do, we have to create a user. This user will be in our database. It is not something that anybody can log in as. We're creating it from that cert. So it's like a dummy user. It's an actual, nobody has access to anything through this user. It's how SQL Server does it. Okay. So we are going to create our user. So I called it dynamic cert user because I believe in having names that make sense so that we can look at it and say, okay, I get it. So create the user from the cert. And then the last thing we're going to do is give permissions to that cert. And remember how it had, when I tried to execute and it said it had needed select on that database. I'm sorry, on that table. So I'm actually going to grant select the entire database so that I can reuse this cert for any store procedure in my database that needs select because it has dynamic SQL in it. Okay, you could give select only on that one table and limit how many store procedures can use that cert. So it depends on how you want to do it, but I kind of like to have it a little bit more useful. So there we go. And then I have code here that will, whoops, went too far. That will bring back the store procedures that are signed. I like to verify that my store procedure is signed. Remember, I'm trying to get around my permissions issue. I don't want to escalate it if I can. And there we have. So it's given the store procedure is DVO.dynamic food search. It's a SQL store procedure, signature by cert, and it tells us what the cert is and gives a thumbprint. Okay, we'll use thumbprints later in another example. So, but this is the code that I like to use. So now that I've signed that cert, I'm going to run this again as Allison swims with gators. What do you think is going to happen? Is it going to work? Let's hope it works. Here we go. And now she can run that store procedure. But she doesn't have access to select. It's the store procedure that has that access to select. Okay, so, and if you did the context like we did before, it's Allison swims with gators all the way through. It doesn't change the security context. So, yay. In the real world, it's not like you write a store procedure and never touch it again. Normally, we have to tweak and tweak and tweak. At my work, I've seen store procedures that have been around for a long time, and we keep a list of who made what changes up in the comment block on the store procedure, and that list can get very long. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when we change a stored procedure. So let's go back to our store procedure, dynamic food search. Only this time I'm going to say, so you could see this is how we do comment blocks at my work, and I absolutely love comment blocks like this. So you can see it put in like the name of whoever the initial release, and then this could get really long with all the tweaks. And then I also have the execute like a procedure test inside that comment block. And I love doing that because that helps you not create like, when I was first learning how, I would put that execute statement at the bottom of a stored procedure, and sometimes it accidentally gets inside the stored procedure, and then you can really cause problems with your data. So love that comment block. Let's change our stored procedure. Instead of bringing back everything, select star, I'm going to say bring back food. If I spell it right, would help. Food name. So just the food. Okay. Run that. Now I've changed my stored procedure. So do you think I'm going to now try to run it as Allison Swims with Gators again? What do you think is going to happen? It's going to fail because that's one of the advantages of signing the sproc is that they cannot change that stored procedure and still have the permissions work without knowing the password, without re-signing it and knowing the password, which is why I told you to put that password in a password manager. Okay, so now all we have to do to re-sign it is, instead of the 4 steps that we did before, we just do the 1, add signature with certificate with password. Whatever that password was that you put in your password manager, I'm going to sign that sproc again. I'm going to verify that it's signed because I am paranoid like that. Yes, signed. And now will Allison be able to run this sproc? Yes, Allison Swims with Gators can run our sproc. There we go. So if you make a change to a stored procedure, you have to re-sign it. Okay. Awesome. So that was dynamic, the dynamic SQL issue. And then we have another one that we're going to talk about, and that is truncating table. There is no permission called truncate table, but everybody wishes, or maybe it's just me, wishes that we had a truncate table permission, because instead of truncate table, you have to give them alter table. And if they can alter a table, they can do all kinds of things to it. And we don't want that. Usually it's not a person, but maybe a service account of some kind, and an ETL process needs to truncate a table before it does whatever else it does. So we're going to do that demo next. So if we pull, look at our truncate table, and again, I made this super easy to follow. All I did is truncate table, and then I did a select from that table. We want to be able to see that that table is truncate. Oh, for those of you, truncate table means you keep the table, you're not dropping the table, but instead you are in one fell swoop getting rid of all the data in the table. It's really fast. You are not deleting row by row. That's very slow. You are truncating the table like it's fast, and that's what, so getting rid of all the data, but the structure of the table still remains. Okay, so that's truncating table. So let's go back to our demo. So I am going to, when I select from my table, I have 7 rows in it. It's a very small table. I know companies can have very large tables with billions of rows. So that's why that truncate table that goes really fast, no matter how many rows, is awesome versus delete. You know, so but this table has 7 rows. 7 rows. Okay, and when I select, let's see, we are going to execute this store procedure under the context of Katie archives medieval history. So I tried doing that and it didn't work. And it tells me that Katie archives medieval history needs execute on that store procedure. So let's grant her execute. And now will this work? No, hopefully not, now that I said no. It does not. It doesn't even give us the best. Normally SQL Server does a pretty good job with their error messages, but this one I think is a little odd. And if you don't know what's happening, you might not understand it. So it comes back and says, can I find the object? That's my table, because it does not exist or you do not have permissions. Basically, it's because you have permissions through the default ownership chaining to select. It could select from that table, but it cannot truncate that table. Okay, so that's why I think the error message in this case is a little misleading. So sometimes you have to kind of look around a little bit more. Don't rely solely on those error messages. So let's, yes.
Sometimes during SQL injection, this message is great because the person doesn't know if it really exists or not.
No, that's honestly true. We can get into that. You can change your SQL messages so that you don't provide too much information for the security purposes of that. Microsoft does a pretty good job of that. They don't want to get too detailed. They want to give you the idea without the specific information. And there are ways that you can even narrow that down or obfuscate. Can't even say the word. So it's a great point. Okay, so let's go ahead and sign our sproc like we did last time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the cert. This one I'm calling truncate cert. Here we go, create certificate. Oops, that won't work. Create certificate, encrypting it by a password. I'm putting that password in a password manager. Here we go. Oops. What happens when you impersonate and it doesn't work is that it doesn't do the revert. So I have to revert. Now I'm back to myself. I'm the sysadmin. I can create my cert. Okay, so I've created the cert. And we know this because I'm going to select from certs. How many certs are you expecting to show up here? Hopefully there are 2, and there are 2. Whoop. Okay, so now I'm going to sign my cert with that same password that I just used, that I just created. And I can do that because I have my password manager and I have sysadmin. You have to have elevator permissions to be able to set this up. Your DBA will have to set it up for you. Now I'm going to create user like we did last time. Remember, this user is like a shell. It's a dummy that nobody can actually log in as. I'm creating it from that cert. So I'm going to do that. And this time, because we don't have truncate table, we have to actually use alter table. So I am going to grant alter to my new truncate cert user. You can do it just on that table, which is the most secure. In this case, I want to be able to reuse my cert for anybody that maybe I have a schema called ETL, and I need to be able to truncate tables inside that whole schema. So I just am showing you how you can grant alter on the schema, and it will still work whether you grant alter on that specific table. Don't do the whole database. Anyway, so you want to use only what you have to do. But in this case, I can now reuse that cert for anything inside that database. A truncate table inside that schema. Okay, So I want to show you that. Now we're going to go like we've done before. We're going to verify our stored procedures that are signed. And now instead of 1, it should bring back 2. It's because we still have our dynamic food search is still signed. And now we're going to truncate favorite foods. That one is now signed also. So now we're going to run. Katie Archives Medieval History is going to run our stored procedure, and it works. And we know what works because I brought back the table and there's no data in here anymore. Done. Truncate table without giving somebody the ability to truncate a table. Yes.
Whenever you use your certs, most secure would be to just grant specifically the select on the table,
Yeah.
enter on the other table, and then execute on the store specific objects.
Yes.
Cert
Yes. So
designing. So now my database, which has 100 tables, 10 of them are open to certs, let's say. But I would think that in your header block where you store procedures, you would want to put, this is a site, store procedure.
to be honest, we haven't signed enough certs or store procedures to have to that administratively figuring it out. I haven't done it. I think putting it in that comment block, but you also would not want to say which cert. You would just want to say something like the start is or the store procedure is assigned or something
Yeah, I
like
can
that.
see where it could be.
And
If you do it at that lowest level, it could be a management nightmare.
yes, so in my mind, that's always a balancing act. And why I am not of the like sign every stored procedure in the most narrow way possible. It's balancing act where you're at, will probably change over time. So for example, this one, I had it being able to truncate table inside a schema because you could use ETL schema. And then maybe those tables that are in that ETL schema, we know are truncated on a regular basis. I mean, I was trying to show you that there are options between alter on the book, all the tables versus just the one table.
No, it makes sense. Because we do truncate because it's very efficient on the large.
Oh, yes, it's great. Truncate table is a great thing.
It's just flipping a bit. It's flipping a flag is what it's doing. But have an elevated Active Directory. Granted execute. Instead of doing this round.
You wouldn't be able to just execute the store procedure. They would have to have.
They have the alter.
Oh, I gotcha. So,
They're granted execute and alter. They're elevated to where they can alter the store procedures or the tables in this one database. Because that's kind of the role, but that's dangerous right there.
that's, yeah. So
If they drop it or do something to it, they have to go back to the code management system. Because I don't keep that, or you have to go and restore a database elsewhere to get the code from the.
So when you give somebody for a service account alter on a table, they can now drop that table. That's why doing it this way, they cannot do that. And so, but again, managing it and how it's always a balancing act. And I think that it kind of depends on how many of them that's up. So, and why I think it would be safer to even maybe make your cert to be able to alter table on the entire database and just still have all of those stored procedures signed. Even if it's not as secure as having a cert only on one table. Yeah. So It's always a balancing act. To me, database security in general is always a balancing act. The most secure would be for nobody to use it, to be able to use it. But we want people to be able to do their jobs. And we need to have it efficient. And so it's always a balancing act. And I'm trying to show you that with a little bit of setup, when you first set it up, how you can do it. Okay. The next demo I'm going to show you is a server level permission. Okay, so in my database, in my server, my SQL server, I have down at the bottom, I have set up auditing. Auditing is an excellent thing to be able to do, and is outside the scope of this presentation to talk about how to set it up. So, but if we look at so in my database, let's see. I have set up an audit called Successful Login. This is an audit. It keeps track of everybody who's logged into the SQL server successfully. I would do a failed logins as a separate audit so that you don't have them all on the same one, but that's how. So if I have sysadmin, I can view my audit logs. But you have to be highly permissioned in order to be able to view audit logs. In SQL Server 2022, they came up with a new permission that is view audit logs. I have not actually used it because I'm not using SQL Server 2022. I'm not positive if you can limit view to a specific audit log or if it's all of them. I'm not sure. I will need to look that up. But since most people have not switched to 2022 yet, I'm going to show you how to sign a sproc so that somebody could view and execute a sproc, even though that sproc is calling an audit log. Okay. It's a little more complicated when it's a server level permission, which makes sense because that server level permission is highly permissioned. Okay. So let's talk about audits. Again, setting up audits is a topic for another night. Okay, so if I look at my stored procedure, and I called it check successful login audit. I am going to modify, so I'm just showing you the stored procedure. All it's doing is pulling back that successful login audits. So it's selecting, but selecting from an audit file instead of from a table. So that's the stored procedure. Let's say I want that new DBA to be able to check this and run that stored procedure, but I don't want her to have access to all of our audit logs because, audit. That's something that's highly privileged. So let's look through our demo. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to run this store procedure that I just showed you as myself. I'm sysadmin. I have permissions. I can do it. And it's bringing back my store procedure, brings back the server principal name, application host name, and that the login succeeded. So who logged in and what are they logging in through? So here I have that I did it and I logged in through SSMS. Okay, so now I want to say, Pam from the office, can you please, since she's my boss, I'm now making her my junior, just saying. Can you please run this stored procedure? And I've granted you execute on that stored procedure. And this time I'm going to execute as login instead of execute as user. And I'm doing that because this is a server level thing to do. Doesn't matter really. And we get our error message and it has control server permission was denied. Control server is not quite sysadmin, but it's really, really close. So control server means I could pretty much do almost anything. A whole lot on the server. And that is not given out. It's just not. Okay. So we are going to sign our sproc, but we have extra steps because it's a server level permission instead of a database level permission. Okay, here we go. The first one is we're going to create or make sure that we have a database master key. A database master key is something that you create one time and you put that password in your password manager, never to forget. Okay. You don't want to lose your password for your master, for your database master key. So I have already created one in this database. So I'm just going to show you that because I have a select. But if you need to create one, I have given you the code for how to create one. You create master key, encryption. You're doing this in the master database. So that's like your database that controls the entire server. Encryption by password. Use a real password. Don't use something like master database key password. Use a real one, put it in your password manager. Okay, so, but I'm going to show you, I already have one. I am checking to make sure I already have it before I go through this process. And yes, database master key right there. Okay, now that I've done that, and that's in the master database, not in sign those sprocs. So now the first thing I'm going to do is create a certificate. This one I'm going to call audit cert because I am going to be able to look at audits by this cert. And I'm making it fairly broad so that any stored procedure that I have that needs to check the audit logs can. I can sign it with the one cert. That's just my way of managing that balance act that we all have to do. So I'm going to create my cert, encrypted by password, your unique password. Subject doesn't matter, but I tried to make it reasonable. And because the last one was master, I have to make sure I include that, use the sign those sprocs. I'm creating this in my database. Okay. Now, just like before, create the cert. Next, I'm going to sign the cert. Doing the same thing, sign the cert like we've done the other ones. Sign the cert. But now we have to copy that same cert to the master database because that cert has to be both in master, which is what controls the SQL Server logins, and my database has to be the exact same thing. So I have put in here where I got this because this is brilliant. And Erlen Summerstock, hopefully I said that right, I'm not positive. And he has this code in here that works great for copying the exact cert that we just created in our sign out sprocs database in the master. So I'm going to run this. And here we have some dynamic SQL, create cert, audit cert from binary, blah, blah, blah. And so I run that. So that is what I'm going to run to copy that cert over. And whoops, I didn't run the whole thing. Okay. Here, I have it to bring back what it actually creates, like this, and then executing it. So let's try that again. And you can see it's create the cert from binary and this little thing here. Okay, I don't want to have to try to copy that. So I just think this is magic. And now we're going to check, and I'm going to prove to you that those certs are the same. So here I'm selecting my certs from the master database and sign those sprocs from audits, then from the sign those sprocs database. And we are going to show that those thumbprints that I mentioned earlier are the exact same. That's in thumbprint. Nailed it. Okay. Now, just like we then created after we signed our certs, then we created the login. Here we're going to create the login. And again, this is a shell. So because I'm creating it from the cert, it's not like somebody can log in as that. That's just how the logistics of how SQL Server does it. So I've created my login. And now I'm going to grant control server to that login. Yes.
You're creating login before you're creating a user.
Yep.
So that's because it's a higher level.
Yep, it's a server level. Okay, so now I'm going to grant control server to this login. And I'm going to go back to my same that I've used multiple times here. I'm going to validate that make sure that my sproc is signed. So I'm going to go through and we should have, we can look here. Oh, I'm in master instead of sign those sprocs. Sorry, try it again. And now we have all three of the sprocs that we have for demos. They're all three signed. Okay, including the new one that I just created, check successful login audit. SQL store procedure, signature by cert, audit cert, and the thumbprint. And now Pam from the office is going to run this again. Yay. So Pam from the office does not have control server. Pam from the office only has execute on this one stored procedure, but she was able to do something that has those elevated permissions that we don't want to give a real person. Okay. Again, if we change the stored procedure, what's going to happen? Let's say, what do we want to do? I don't care about bringing back, I don't know. We no longer need the action name. And now, just like before, when I try to run my stored procedure, she doesn't have control server. She can't do it. And so again, just like before, just like the database one, all we have to do is re-sign it. And I'm going to sign it again. And then as the DBA, I want to make sure that I really signed it. So I'm going to run my code and make sure I signed it. Yes, signed. And now Pam from the office should be able to run that code again. So when I'm doing deployments as a DBA, I'm going to do the deployment. So any changes to a store procedure. Normally, most companies, depending on how your company is set up, you're hopefully not letting all of the developers the ability to change their code at whim. That's a bad idea. So this way, when I update a store procedure that's signed, I do have a second step. I have to sign it. Again. Are there questions about that? Yes. Typically, yes. Not always, depending on how things set up. Okay. That's all I have. So let me bring back my PowerPoint. I have my contact information here.
Just thinking about class engagement. And this cybersecurity tool. But like this one, nice. But it was a very small team, so.
Often, like a small company will have, maybe they'll only have 2 or 3 people in their entire IT department. They have every sysadmin. And then what happens is the company grows, then you have to pull back those permissions. And let me tell you that if somebody has access, and then you have to tell them that they no longer have access, that is much harder. It's doable, don't get me wrong, but it's harder. So it's better, in my opinion, to set it up from the beginning to have some kind of a change management process and some kind of a process where you have to go through either a person or a team or something, some kind of a process. So usually a DBA, that's kind of like one of the things. But again, it doesn't have to be. It's just, I have only worked at one company, and so when I hear, but I teach alongside people that work at other companies, and the range of over permissioning, it's incredible to me. Like, it's amazing to me how much permission some people have.
I feel like you said, the number of people in a team is probably the reason they don't have enough resources to manage permissions on a flyer, or they cannot even probably set up a deployment process that you kind of automated, even if you're not a DBA, which is what we kind of do in our team. On Azure resources. It's gonna really cost you the settings. I'm not doing it on on-prem.
Your family. You're paying for it.
Yeah, database security, the topic in general is fascinating to me. It's pretty funny. Cybersecurity is this really big trending topic. And then database security is not. I'm just saying, like, I go to CAS conference, which is a big conference, SQL Server world, and there's not very many sessions on database security. And at the last CAS conference, Kimberly Tripp said that she's like a big wig in the SQL Server world. She just is. And she said that if she has a session that's on performance tuning, making it go faster, making your queries go faster, that will like fill up in just immediately. And if she has a database security topic, And it takes a while to build, and even if it's Kimberly talking about it. So, I just think of it as my role in life is to evangelize database security. So, yes.
Do you have a place that you can place your code and then I can just post?
It's GitHub. So yeah,
So, okay.
it's on GitHub. I can give you that link.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's info junkie one and then sign those sprocs. And that has all of the stored procedures I created and the demo scripts, all of that is.
What do you use a VS Code or something to create these, or do you actually do it in transfer data? You do projects, VS Code or any particular portal?
I mean, for this, I just use SSMS and then upload it to GitHub. Yeah, like at work, we do things differently, but that's how I did this.
Do you do automated code deployments for any of the stored procedures or in general?
Yes.
Or anything in your database? Do you do automated code deployments?
At work, I do,
Yeah.
not personal, but yeah, yes, we do.
Can you put your slide deck up there, Jay?
It's on there.
Oh, great.
Slide deck's on there too. If I miss something, just let me know and I'll add it to it. So slide deck, all the stored procedures, the table, and the demo scripts are on GitHub.
I was unaware of signing sort of procedures.
So
See,
And I've been in DBA for since SQL 6.5. I'm signing is new.
signing is new. I think that I can't remember when they introduced it. It's actually been around for a little while. I think part of the reason why people don't do it, number one, they call it signing modules. You can sign stored procedures. You can also sign functions. You can also sign triggers. I focused on stored procedures. That's the only thing I have actually done. And so I wanted to, focus on what I have done. So I know a little bit more about it. And I think that just calling it module signing just turns the brain off right away. I don't know. But, and I think it can be overwhelming. And I think part of the reason why I put myself as a database security evangelist, when I go to a session on module signing, the person up there is a security expert and they want you to sign everything. And I think that we need to inch into it and do the ones like control server is not a permission I'm giving out to anyone else. So this way I can get around that.
Yeah, and I agree, like, alter table is extremely
Yes.
dangerous.
They can drop the table. Yeah. Yes.
So you created login from certificate.
Right.
What about for logins that are already created? Like, let's say a security.
I would do it.
So you just add the certificate like you did in the other places? Or how you,
I'm sorry.
so for a login,
Uh-huh.
that's you mentioned giving access to service account, or in this case, I'm looking for a service.
So if I were using a service account, that would be like instead of executed login from the office, I could execute it as that service account. I would not give that service account the additional permissions. That's what I don't want to do because I know that sometimes other people can log depending on the, have access to, they might have like the password. I don't have that control.
So the reason I asked it is,
Sure.
in generic processes, if you're running a SSIS packet or ADF to run these on the back end, then I'm not gonna give ADF or SSIS my personal password. I want to use like a service account or service principal,
Right.
preferably. So in that case, what cert login do I use?
You're gonna still create that shell login. That's just the only purpose of that login is to sign the cert.
So that where she has PM from the office, that's gonna be your service account.
This would be where you would use that service. I just have it T equal to execute as login, but your service account can then, all you have to do then is give that service account execute on that stored procedure. You don't have to give that service account control server.
But the thing is also I'm trying to auto deploy stuff. So I am not manually going in and putting in my code, my password there. I could generate a password and put it in Key Vault, look it up on any client, like whenever.
So if you want to automate your deployment and you have your store procedures updated, if you want to automatically sign it, there are ways to do that. I have not done that myself. But I know that there are ways you can
It
do
is
that.
well.
Yeah. I just haven't played with that, so we have not yet had enough store procedures that are signed to justify that time for me to figure that out, but I know it's coming.
When you were talking about dynamic SQL, one of the main things, everything I do create dynamic SQL, so I can,
Yeah.
I don't have to redo the same thing 5 or 50 different times. So if I don't have to sign 50 different sort procedures, if I can just automate it once, and I make sure it goes to its vault or whatever.
Our own Summers Guard has an example of being able to automatically sign the store procedures. And so he explains how he does that. And that would be in that link.
Where did you say?
Erlin Summers Guard. Yeah, and that's in that link that I provided earlier. I just, again, haven't done it myself. So I'm not, you know, makes me a little hesitant to have something automatically sign the store procedures and kind of in my head takes away some of the advantages of signing the store procedures. Again, the management I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't needed to do that yet. So.
Thank you very much. And David online, he says excellent session, Sharon.
Thank you. Excellent. Are there any more questions? Okay.